Long before the Greeks sat down to write philosophy, long before the Romans laid their first paved road, a people lived quietly and happily along this narrow strip of coastline and called themselves Canaanites. The Greeks later gave them another name, one that would echo through history: Phoenicians, from a word meaning the purple land. The name was no accident, because these shores held a secret no other nation on earth possessed. From a small, unassuming sea snail called the murex, they extracted a deep purple dye so rare and so agonizingly laborious to produce that only kings and the highest nobility could ever afford to wear it. That purple, which would one day become the very symbol of imperial Rome, poured out of the workshops of Tyre and Sidon to every corner of the ancient world, and everyone, it seemed, wanted it. Yet Phoenician wealth was never only about a color. Byblos, the city we know today as Jabil, is one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on the planet, home to human life for more than 7,000 years. From this small harbor, ships built of fragrant cedar sailed to Egypt, trading timber the pharaohs prized above almost anything else for gold and fine linen. A trade so central that the Greek name for the Christian holy book, Bible, is believed to descend from the very name of the city, since Egyptian papyrus reached the Greek world through this one small port. But the greatest gift the Phoenicians ever gave to all of humanity was something no scale could ever hope to weigh. They built an alphabet of only 22 letters, a radical simplification of the hundreds of tangled symbols found in cuneiform and hieroglyphics. Suddenly, writing was no longer the guarded privilege of royal scribes. Ordinary merchants and sailors could learn it too. The Greeks borrowed it and added vowels. The Romans reshaped it into Latin letters. And today, the descendants of these simple marks live on in most of the world's writing systems, from English to Arabic to Persian. It is almost unbelievable that the smallest country in the Middle East handed humanity its most essential tool of civilization. Yet this is exactly how Lebanon's story begins. The port cities of Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, and Byblos never bowed to a single crown. Each kept its own king, its own temples, its own fleet. And this rivalry may be exactly why the Phoenicians turned to the open sea rather than conquering their neighbors by land. Their ships slipped through the Strait of Gibraltar, found silver in the hills of Spain, and in 814 BCE, merchants from Tyre founded a city in North Africa they named Carthage, never imagining that this modest colony would one day, under a general named Hannibal, march to the very gates of Rome and shake the empire to its foundations. Such riches never went unnoticed by the empires of the region. A land this wealthy always lay across the path of whichever power dominated the Near East, and the Assyrians were the first to reduce these cities to tribute, followed by the Babylonians, and after Babylon's fall, the Persians. Yet even under foreign rule, the Phoenicians held a place no other subject people could claim, because no empire could command the Mediterranean without a Phoenician fleet at its side. The ships of Tyre and Sidon became the backbone of the navy Darius and Xerxes hurled against the Greeks in the great Greco-Persian wars, and Persian kings who could conquer armies on land still had to court the loyalty of these stubborn little port cities at sea. Then came Alexander of Macedon in 332 BC, marching toward Egypt. He passed along this coast, and most Phoenician cities surrendered without a fight. But Tyre, an island fortress whose walls rose straight out of the sea, refused, and what followed became one of the most breathtaking sieges of the ancient world. Lacking a fleet strong enough to take the island, Alexander ordered his soldiers to tear down the old mainland city and pile its rubble into a causeway stretching toward the walls. For 7 relentless months, the men of Tyre rained stone and fire down on the engineers below, while the Macedonians kept pressing forward day and night until the walls finally collapsed that summer. After Alexander's death, this land passed between his Hellenistic successors until Rome, hungry for the East, annexed it in 64 BC under the general Pompey. This time it was Beirut, smaller and lesser known than Tyre or Sidon, whose fortunes changed forever. The Romans built it into one of the empire's great centers of learning. The law school of Beirut, founded in the 3rd century AD, was so respected that Romans called it the mother of laws, and the jurists who later helped draft the Code of Justinian, the very foundation of civil law in much of the modern world, were trained within its halls. Students came from Spain to Asia Minor to study there, and for 2 centuries this small coastal city was the intellectual capital of the ancient legal world. The true splendor of Roman architecture in Lebanon, though, rose not in Beirut but deep in the Bekaa Valley, in a city the Greeks called Heliopolis, the city of the sun, known today as Baalbek. There the Romans raised the largest temple complex anywhere in their empire, the Temple of Jupiter, with columns soaring more than 20 meters, dwarfed every other Roman temple from Britain to Egypt, and its foundation stones, the famous trilithon, each weigh more than 800 tons, blocks so massive that historians and engineers still cannot fully explain how ancient builders ever moved them from a quarry hundreds of meters away. But splendor is never eternal. At midnight on July 9th, 551 AD, a catastrophic earthquake tore through the coast, and Beirut, that brilliant center of legal scholarship, collapsed almost entirely. A tsunami followed, swallowing much of the shoreline, and many historians believe this disaster, together with the fires that followed, brought the golden age of the law school of Beirut to its end. A city that had been the brightest beacon of legal knowledge in the world was buried in a single night beneath its own ruins. In those same centuries, as Rome crumbled and split into East and West, something quieter was taking shape in the Lebanese mountains that would reshape this land's identity forever. A monk named Maron gathered a devoted following in what is now Syria, and after his death, his followers, at odds theologically with the dominant Church of Constantinople, fled persecution and climbed toward Lebanon's soaring, near impassable peaks. It was no accident. These mountains had always been a natural refuge for anyone seeking distance from central power. The Maronites built monasteries, planted vineyards, tilled the soil, and forged an identity that was both deeply Christian and deeply bound to this one mountain. Centuries later, this same rugged geography let other communities, including the Druze who arrived from Egypt, survive side by side despite periodic tension. And modern Lebanon's extraordinary mosaic of 18 recognized religious communities traces directly back to these early centuries of mountain refuge. In the 7th century, a storm rose out of Arabia that redrew the map of the Middle East forever. In under a decade, Muslim armies toppled the Sassanid Empire and seized most of Byzantine territory, and Lebanon fell under the banner of the Islamic Caliphate. What set this conquest apart was that the Christian communities of the mountains, above all the Maronites, kept their identity intact in their remote valleys, even as the coastal cities gradually took on an Islamic character, a divide between Christian mountain and Muslim coast that would echo through Lebanon's later history. At the close of the 11th century, European armies arrived to reclaim Jerusalem. The Crusaders seized Lebanese coastal cities like Tripoli and Tyre. And unlike most local communities, the mountain Maronites built a close bond with them, one that grew into a lasting union between the Maronite Church and Rome that endures to this day. Crusader rule did not last. By the 13th century, the Mamluks of Egypt, slave soldiers turned into an unmatched military power, conquered the Crusader strongholds one by one until the last European outposts in the Levant fell. In 1516, the Ottoman Empire, at the height of its power, defeated the Mamluks and absorbed the Levant, Lebanon included. But unlike most Ottoman territory, the Lebanese mountains never fully submitted to Istanbul. The sultans preferred to leave this difficult terrain to local princes who, in exchange for nominal loyalty, enjoyed sweeping autonomy. In the early 17th century, an emir named Fakhreddin II built alliances with European powers, modernized his army, and dreamed of a unified, thriving Lebanon, a dream that put him on a collision course with Istanbul. The Sultan finally crushed him and had him executed in 1635, though the idea he planted never truly died. A century and a half later, Bashir II of the Shihab dynasty revived that same dream and brought the mountain emirate to the height of its power, until his alliance with Egypt against the Ottomans in the 1830s cost him everything. When Europe rushed to the Sultan's defense, Bashir was stripped of power and exiled. His fall left a vacuum whose consequences were catastrophic. Long-simmering tension between Druze and Maronites, who had lived side by side for centuries without ever fully resolving their rivalries, exploded into unprecedented violence in 1860, one of the bitterest chapters in Lebanon's history, leaving thousands of Christians dead and villages burned across the mountain. France sent troops to Beirut, and the European powers pressured Istanbul into creating an autonomous province called the Mutasarrifate of Mount Lebanon, governed by a Christian but effectively watched over by Europe. The decades that followed until the First World War were relatively calm and prosperous. Silk thrived, schools opened, and many Lebanese emigrated to the Americas and Africa, building a global diaspora that endures today and by many estimates now outnumbers Lebanon's own population. That calm shattered with the First World War. An Allied naval blockade, harsh Ottoman rule under Jamal Pasha, drought, and a devastating locust plague combined into the catastrophe remembered as the Great Famine. Historians estimate that between 100,000 and 200,000 people, nearly a third of the mountain's population, died of hunger and disease between 1915 and 1918. Families abandoning children in the streets in hope some stranger might save them. It is a wound still largely unspoken in Lebanese memory, proof that long before any civil war, this nation had already lived through mass hunger and mass death. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, France took the mandate over Lebanon, and on September 1st, 1920, General Henri Gouraud proclaimed the State of Greater Lebanon in Beirut, uniting the historic Christian and Druze mountain with the coastal cities in the fertile Bekaa Valley. It seemed a logical step toward a stable, Christian-anchored state, but it carried its own contradiction. The country's Muslim population, once a small minority confined to the mountain, now made up nearly half the total, and many Sunni leaders along the coast who considered themselves part of a greater Syria viewed the new country's legitimacy with suspicion from the very start, a seed that would sprout decades later into civil war. Even so, through the 1920s and 1930s, Lebanon's Christian and Muslim leaders gradually found a way to coexist. And in 1943, they reached an unwritten understanding known as the National Pact. The president would always be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament a Shia Muslim, a balance based on the 1932 census, the last one Lebanon has ever taken, since no one would ever again risk a new count that might reveal how much the country's demographics had shifted. That same year, after the French arrested Lebanese leaders for amending the constitution without permission and public pressure won their release, Lebanon celebrated its independence, a sign from the very start that its freedom was won through resistance rather than simply granted. The 1950s and 1960s are remembered by many Lebanese as the country's golden age. Beirut, with its modern architecture, seaside cafes, and banking sector, built on political stability and strict secrecy laws, became the financial and cultural capital of the Middle East, earning the nickname the Paris of the Middle East, while the American University of Beirut shaped a generation of Arab thinkers and leaders. But beneath this glittering surface, the wealth was distributed unevenly. The Shia South and Sunni North remained poor even as Beirut shone. And after 1948, a great wave of Palestinian refugees arrived, a population that, especially once the PLO relocated its leadership to Beirut in 1970, grew into an armed force that upset the country's delicate balance even further. On April 13, 1975, an event remembered as Black Saturday, a bus of Palestinian passengers ambushed in a Christian Beirut neighborhood became the spark that ignited this powder keg, and violence spread across the country within days. Beirut split into a Christian East and a Muslim West, divided by the ruined, bullet-scarred Green Line, and the civil war that followed dragged on for 15 years and was never simply two sides fighting. Christian phalangists, Druze militias, Hezbollah, born among the Shia in the 1980s, and Palestinian factions fought in shifting, often contradictory alliances. Syria, which entered to keep the peace, became a permanent occupier until 2005, and Israel invaded twice, most devastatingly in 1982, pushing all the way to Beirut under the pretext of eliminating Palestinian bases. That invasion's darkest hour came in September 1982, when Christian militiamen, as the Israeli army encircled Palestinian refugee camps, massacred hundreds of civilians at Sabra and Shatila, a wound that still shadows the region's conscience. By 1989, after bloodshed that claimed more than 150,000 lives and displaced hundreds of thousands more, Lebanon's surviving leaders met in Saudi Arabia and signed the Tyre Agreement, rebalancing power away from the Maronite presidency toward the Sunni premiership in parliament. The war officially ended in 1990, but its wounds, physical and psychological, never fully healed. After the war, Rafik Hariri, a billionaire who had built his fortune in Saudi Arabia, became prime minister and rebuilt Beirut's shattered downtown through his company Solidari. And the city, though carrying hidden scars, recaptured something of its former glow. But Syrian influence never loosened, and Hariri, who had turned against its continued military presence, was assassinated on February 14, 2005, along with 21 others, in a massive Beirut explosion. Rather than silencing the Lebanese, his death sparked one of the largest peaceful demonstrations in Middle Eastern history, the Cedar Revolution. And under that pressure, Syria finally withdrew its troops that April after nearly 30 years. For a moment, it seemed Lebanon was stepping toward genuine sovereignty, but peace did not last. In the summer of 2006, after Hezbollah captured 2 Israeli soldiers near the border, Israel launched a 34-day war that devastated the country's roads, bridges, and airport, ending in a ceasefire with no clear victor and a reminder once again of just how fragile Lebanon's peace truly was. If the civil war had wounded Lebanon's body, the 2000s and 10s tore apart its economic soul. Years of corruption, crushing government debt, and a banking system built on unfulfillable promises collapsed in the autumn of 2019. The lira lost more than 90% of its value. A lifetime of ordinary people's savings was trapped inside the banks, and millions fell below the poverty line. That same autumn, the October Revolution swept the country, for the first time crossing every sectarian line behind one shared demand: the removal of the entire. And yet, if Lebanon's history has taught the world one lesson, it is this nation's extraordinary capacity to rise again from the edge of ruin. Beirut, founded by the Phoenicians, transformed by Rome into a center of learning, flattened by earthquakes, set ablaze by wars, and wounded by explosions, still stands. The cedar tree on this country's flag is the very same tree that has weathered mountain cold, drought, and wildfire throughout history, returning each time greener than before. Lebanon has come to the edge of destruction again and again, from Alexander's siege and Beirut's earthquake to the Great Famine, the Civil War, and the port explosion. Yet every time, out of its own ashes, a new generation has risen, carrying the same stubborn love of life, the same instinct for trade and artistry, and the same deep belonging to this mountain and this sea. Empires rose here and fell here. Borders were drawn and redrawn around it, and still the coffee kept brewing in Beirut's cafes, and the grapes kept ripening on the mountain terraces. Perhaps the true story of Lebanon lies not in the empires that came and went, but in its people who, like the cedar, keep their roots in the rock and never, even through the darkest winters, wither completely away.